Welcome to episode 20.
Hey, this is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to Who Did That Voice, where we take an in-depth look at voiceovers.
The holiday season is upon us, and there is no time like the present to book your holiday getaway with 3D Travel Company. Whether you want to set sail on the high seas or visit exotic and foreign locales, maybe your dream is to see a magical mouse, or maybe you long for a getaway that will universally appeal to all. For a limited time, my listeners receive a Disney gift card with qualifying Disney vacation purchases booked and traveled by the end of 2016. For more information on booking any of these trips, go to 3dtravelcompany.com and tell them Trenton sent you.
Welcome to Who Did That Voice, the show where we take an in-depth look at voiceover. And now, here's your host, Trenton Larkin.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. This week's special guest is Cliff Zellman. Cliff is an Emmy Award-winning professional audio engineer with 35 plus years experience. He is also a voice actor, copywriter, creative director, voiceover coach, and more. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Who Did That Voice? Today on the show we have a very legendary guest, Cliff Zellman. Cliff, thanks so much for joining us today.
Trent, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it and been looking forward to it.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. My whole voiceover world kind of got started with my dad and just, some different influences in my life from Marvin the Martian and other animations. But you were really my introduction into the voiceover world when I attended your workshop, the Dallas Voice Acting Meetup. And we met with Katie Lee, who was there guest directing the Mr. Men scripts, and that was a blast. And so you were really my first introduction into the world of VO, along with Katie Lee. And so I want to thank you for that and for being an inspiration for me to have this show as well, Cliff.
Thank you. My pleasure. I don't know if I should send you a thank you note or an I'm sorry about that. It's, as you've progressed, it's a lot of work, you really realize just how much is involved. Katie was a terrific guest. Apparently she would come and watch our band play maybe once or twice in high school. And I went to Van Nuys High School and she went to Birmingham, and the drummer in our band was from Birmingham.
Katie was actually my very first guest on the show, so it's been very humbling to have you guys on the show because, we've come full circle all these years later, and it's just been a real exciting time for me to have you guys on the show to get to speak with you and share your stories with the world.
It's a pleasure to be here, Trenton. Thank you again.
I believe you were in about the 5th grade, and you found a guitar in a garbage can, I believe, and it kind of was your inspiration that led you to eventually having that garage band that you'd mentioned.
Thursday was trash day. And when you walk home from school and, like all your parents tell you, I walked 20 miles uphill both ways to school when I was a kid. I really looked forward to Thursday. That was the day that I could go through all the trash cans, find all kinds of great things. And one of the things that I found was a guitar. The headstock was sticking out of the trash can. And as I got closer and closer, I said, oh my gosh, pulled it out. The whole back was smashed in. But that did not stop me. I brought it home. I poured about maybe 1.5 gallons of Elmer's white glue all over it and wrapped it up with duct tape. Thought I'd give it a really good chance to dry, so I let it sit there for about 15, 20 minutes while I got on my Stingray and drove down to Baxter Northrop Music, which I think was on the corner of Van Nuys Boulevard and Ventura. And I bought a set of guitar strings from my paper route money, went back, put on the strings, tried to tune it, worked great for about maybe 5 minutes, and the entire guitar imploded.
Oh, no.
Well, one of the problems was I let it sit for 15 minutes. I probably should have let it sit for about 3 days. And I bought steel strings, and this was a nylon string guitar. That poor guitar didn't stand a chance, but my dad is a piano player, and still playing, 87 years old, still great. Every now and then I'll post a Jerry Plays the 40s on Facebook. And he saw me, the disappointment when I'm holding basically kindling. And within the next 2 days, I think we went over to Fedco and I bought my first real guitar, started taking lessons and absolutely loved it. Had a great guitar teacher named Ed who was he seemed like he was 80 years old, but he was probably in his mid-40s, and he was a great studio jazz guitar player. So, after he taught me all the basics and pretty much how to, get an idea on reading chord charts, I left and started on my own and never put it down. And been playing now going on, I don't know, over 50 years.
Wow.
I should be much better. I don't think I've learned anything new since Ramblin' Man. I play about a half hour a day, sit and watch a baseball game and don't plug in the guitar, just sit there and play it. And it's wonderful. I've got a nice collection going, and I should play more.
Absolutely, Cliff. Well, I know some of the groups that you kind of were mimicking were groups like the Monkees and the Beach Boys and other popular groups from that era.
I guess those were the only groups I really knew, in
Yeah.
fifth grade, sixth grade, you have a pretty limited choice. We did have KHJ Boss Radio that I used to listen to. Instead of downloading music, we would sit there with a little Panasonic recorder and hold it up in front of the radio, and that was my mixtape.
Well, tell us, how did you end up getting your independent record deal, and what was the whole deal with firing the engineer and taking over?
As the years progressed, we got better and better, and we started to do a little more esoteric, kind of moved away from the Monkees and got more into bands like Genesis and Yes and Gentle Giant, stuff like that. And we got the ear of supposedly, I never really knew, but this was the kid of one of the dads that owned one of the big hotels in Las Vegas. And I think he saw us at a club or something, came up to us and offered us to do an independent record. It was really learned by doing. And about 2 weeks into the record, I was really unhappy with what the engineer was doing. He was making us sound 60s, more pop, didn't really understand the music that we were playing, made some comments about, no one's going to listen to it. Well, talk about keeping a positive vibe during a session. So we fired him. I kind of fired him, and I ended up taking over. Now, I had a lot of experience plugging in guitar stomp boxes, so, hey, I have an idea of signal flow. I had help, one of the house engineers helped out, but doing that and spending a month in the studio at such an early age, maybe 17 years old, was magical. And I never wanted to leave, and we would do 15, 18-hour sessions, and I was like, where did the time go? So eventually, and not too far off, the studio that we were working at offered me a job as an assistant engineer. And that didn't last very long because the folks weren't so happy about that. I was figuring out what to do in college. They never really considered a professional musician job for me, and kind of wanted me to go into accounting, I guess. So after high school, I enrolled at LAVC and took a year of accounting. And I'll tell you, Trenton, every class I just got further and further behind until I got to the point I said, this is just a waste of time. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where the money's coming from. I don't know where it's going. I have no idea what's going on. So I switched my major to music, and that was a lot of fun, and took a lot of theory classes. Didn't take any performing classes because I really wasn't there that long. After I was walking one day during lunch, and I went to the community bulletin board, and there on the bulletin board was an ad for a Gofer for a studio on Lancashire Boulevard, and I had really no idea what this studio was, which turned out to be one of the baddest studios in LA at the time. It was called Davlin Recording Studios, and during the day it was like Hall & Oates, at night was Alice Cooper. Then after that was England Dan and John Ford Coley and Al Stewart, just a parade of stars coming in and out. And I was pretty young, and, I really came in at the absolute bottom. And I guess I'm pretty grateful for that, because it taught me to take the most menial task and really make it my own. I'd have to go out and stock the refrigerator with Pepsis and 7-Up and whatever. But when I would stock it, I'd always make sure that the labels were facing outward. And I'd clean the bathrooms and I'd make sure they were absolutely shiny, and I would fold over the toilet paper. So when anybody saw something, they'd think, oh, okay, Cliff did this. So this went on for about a year. I did tape inventory, and then I got my big promotion to receptionist. And I was allowed to answer the phone. Thank you for calling Davlin Studios. How may I direct your call? Oh, yeah, can I talk to Alice? It's like, cool, man. Let me put you on hold. So that lasted, about 6 months. And then I got another promotion where I was allowed to actually go into the studio and wrap mic cables. Once I was in the studio wrapping cables, cleaning up after sessions, taking out the trash, I would hang out at night, and I'd hang out with the maintenance guys. They taught me how to solder, because they didn't want to solder, and strip wires, and eventually taught me how to align a tape machine. And that lasted at Davlin for about another 6 months, and got an offer at Fidelity Recording Studios on Whitsett and Moore Park. And I went down there for an interview, and they did not have the clientele that Davlin had. But I felt that I could have much more hands-on experience. And that lasted for, 17 years. Working my way up from assistant engineer to house engineer to chief engineer to head of in-house production. And then I ran the music publishing company for a while. But I really don't think I would have been able to do any of that stuff if I didn't start off at the absolute bottom and, learn where to find 2-inch tape at 2:00 on a Wednesday morning, building relationships with other assistant engineers and other studios around LA. That's really important, and I don't think a lot of people have that opportunity anymore with technology as it is. So many resources. We had no resources. Resource was a telephone. People are jumping into professional situations much sooner these days without really having that kind of background and knowing how to solve problems on your own and trying to be seamless in the background and keep your ears open. And I think that we kind of need to get back to that, but I don't know if we ever will.
Absolutely. I would wholeheartedly agree with you on that. Well, with everything that you've done, Cliff, how did you end up going from rock and roll to animation?
Oh, my goodness. Well, Fidelity Recording Studios was rather infamous back in the day. What happened was I was doing rock and roll for so long, for 16, 17 years. And with rock and roll comes all the things that come with rock and roll. Sessions going until 4 or 5 in the morning. I was married, had a new baby, and didn't really want to do rock and roll anymore. And remember the old Godfather line, just when you thought you're out, they pull you back in. Well, it took me about 1.5 years, 2 years to really get out of rock and roll, and started working at Fidelity recording dialogue for animation, and they came to the studio. I volunteered to be the fader thrower, so to speak, and I sat there real quiet while I had the best of the best directors sitting next to me for 5 years while I was throwing faders. So the most important thing in my job was to make sure that only one microphone was on while the actor was talking. Now, these actors are hired not only because they're brilliant, but because of their incredible ad-lib skills. So if I yank the fader down because my script said that was the end of their line, sometimes they would continue with an ad-lib. I was always on edge. One fader down, one fader up. Grandma on fader 1, Tweezle on fader 3, Osgood on fader 1, throwing back and forth. And then we'd have group cheers where, yay, I want to go too. And then bam, all the faders go up, all the faders go down, pull up 8. And if you could go 15, 20 minutes without missing a fader, that's pretty awesome. The palms of my hands were sweating. The pay was excellent. We did 2 4-hour sessions a day, and I was running between North Hollywood to Studio City to Burbank, back and forth. And I really loved it. And an example of how times have changed, every session we walked in, there was a deli platter. There was fruit. There was cold cuts. There was drinks, non-alcoholic, of course. If it was an afternoon session, there were turkey sandwiches. And, back then there was 8 or 9 people doing it. We basically traveled around. Now, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of wonderful voice talents working under all different kinds of situations. I just kind of feel bad that, some folks that are really, really good today, never had a chance to experience that, the red carpet treatment. It was nice. And boy, I'll tell you, it was red carpet, that's for sure.
You kind of mentioned briefly that you worked with Deke and Disney and Saban, and I know you've done like dozens of Saturday morning cartoons when it comes to the audio perspective. And what was it like working on all those shows and kind of structuring the childhood that I grew up with and many others my age range had grew up with as well?
It's not like you're sitting there and watching it on TV. It's very disjointed. We're working off of storyboards. But I'll tell you what it was nerve-wracking. If I missed a fader and a guy was talking and didn't come over, the director would sometimes look over to me and then look back at, through the glass to everybody in the semicircle and say, guys, it seems our engineer missed a fader. Maybe we're going a little too quick for him. Cliff, do we need to slow down? Guys, maybe you need to slow down a little bit so our engineer can keep up. Knowing, you miss a fader throw, there's a line of guys standing outside the door that would love to come in, take your place, and do it for free. So it was nerve-wracking. It was the pressure was definitely on. Not only did I have to maintain my studio etiquette, but I had to make sure that technically everything was perfect. You get a great ad lib from one of these guys, you cannot go back and do it again. You can try, but it's just not going to have the magic that it has.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I did is I got all of my levels, and I'm sitting in front of a large console here. I've got 8 faders in front of me. And the faders are actually set so I can put them all the way to the top of the throw, which means all the way to the top. And I would adjust my level from the mic pre, which is up at the top of the board. So I didn't have to pull that fader up to 0. I had to just throw it all the way to the top and then let my mic pre make sure that I wasn't overloading. So you didn't have to land anywhere when you're throwing faders, going a mile a minute. I knew the importance of what I was doing. I knew the pressure that I was under. Like I said, my palms were sweating, and I loved it. Every 4-hour session felt like I just ran a marathon. I felt alive. I felt, involved. It was great. That lasted, like I said, about 5 years.
Wow, that's a good long run. Well, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I do want to let people know that you did work on Power Rangers. It is something that's super special to me. And the fact that you were able to work on that show is pretty awesome. I know there's a lot of fans of this show that are Power Ranger fans as well. And the fact that you were able to be a part of that is pretty amazing as well.
I was actually more than the continuing production of Power Rangers. I was the first stop for the cattle call. We had a line going around the block, all the way down Witsit Boulevard, of people coming in to do all of the ADR. And we just got in the 3/4-inch tapes from Japan, and we're looking at them. And the brilliant and ever talented and incredibly successful Tony Oliver was sitting next to me. And he was looking at this. We're watching before, we came in to do the auditions. And I just got finished doing a heavy metal band. So, I had my long hair and my ripped up Rolling Stone shirt. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching this. And this is all new to me. I never heard of Power Rangers. I didn't know what it was. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Meanwhile, Tony next to me is drooling, thinking, this is going to change everything. Well, we found out who was right and who was wrong. That was a lot of fun, watching the voices come to life. And that's really where I got my love for ADR. While I was doing animation, I was also very involved with Foley and ADR. And for those listening that don't know what Foley very simply is human sounds. Sitting in a chair, taking off your glasses, lighting a lighter, putting down a drink, opening a car door, the ruffle of your clothes, anything that humans create. I was very fortunate. I worked on a lot of horror movies. It was so much fun creating bone-breaking sounds. The drool coming off of the monster's mouth, which was usually a raw chicken filled with Jell-O, and you'd reach into the cavity of the chicken and slowly pull your hand out of this chicken carcass. Now, that's all fine and good until you realize you've been working for about 8.5 hours. And this chicken Jell-O combination starts to get a little bit funky. And I'm in the control room and the Foley artists are out, so I don't really smell it. And I'll come in a couple hours and move a microphone, do whatever. And it's like, oh my God, what are you talking about? Don't you smell that? I guess when your nose is in it for 8 hours, you really don't. But these guys were amazing. They would come in with truckloads, and I would call it the treasure trove of Foley. And they would bring in car doors every percussion instrument, every utensil from a kitchen, a workshop from a garage, hammers, bags of nails, hubcaps, any sound you could possibly imagine, a whole rolling case just filled with different types of shoes. And we had what's called Foley pits. They're like you'd lift up the floor, and underneath the floor in the main room were 9 pits. One that had gravel, one that had sand, one that had stone, another had brick, another had concrete rough, another had concrete smooth. We had one that was railroad ties that made the sound. So a lot of walking effects. Foley walking is an art form. You're actually walking, but you're not moving. To create that sound of motion without moving is quite a talent. We would just next, flipping pages and building sounds. That's really what I love to do, is putting elements together, whether it's music, bass lines, guitars, drums, synths, vocals, or Foley, sound effects, explosions, just putting them all together and creating one experience.
Well, Cliff, thank you so much for sharing all these deep, detailed stories.
Oh,
And,
I guess.
hey, man, it's fantastic.
No, you're welcome. But deep, I don't know.
Well, I mean, because you're giving us more than just, hey, I did Foley, hey, I did ADR work. You know what I mean? It's deep in the sense of the people that are going to hear this. It's deep for them because they haven't necessarily dove into these topics like you're diving in. So, Cliff, getting back to all of the story about you, man, how you've been talking about LA, but you're in Dallas now. So how did that all transpire? What made you move from LA to Dallas?
Well, being out of rock and roll, really starting around 1990, LA is obviously the place for production, television production. But in February 1994, my house was the black dot on the FEMA map for destruction for the 94 Northridge earthquake.
Wow.
And FEMA, the next day, when they could make their way through the debris, knocked on my door. I opened the door to my house. Guy walks in, looks around and says, wow. We needed a new place to live. So my brother married a girl from Dallas 8 years before the earthquake. And we would go and visit a couple times a year. Loved my brother, missed my brother, took my wife, took the baby. And we're walking down the street at night. I'm walking his dog and with my wife, and I see a sign in front of a house on his block. Beautiful little house, really nice brick, big archway in the front. And in Dallas back then, the housing market was really in the toilet. I mean, they couldn't give away a house. And we were pricing houses in LA and the Valley and 400. That's funny because, now it seems like a bargain, but back then, $450,000, $500,000 for an 1,800 square foot house with no air conditioning. It was crazy. In Dallas, they have these sign posts on the front lawn that tell you everything about the house. And I looked at a number on the bottom and I thought, wow, that's a pretty reasonable down payment. Well, my wife said, no, that's the price of the house. We said, oh my God. Well, it just so happened to be on the block of an exemplary rated elementary school that my daughter would soon be attending. Got real excited, went back to LA. I booked another trip to Dallas about 2 or 3 months later, little fact finding, visited every studio, brought in my resume. Every studio I walked into, they said, absolutely, you got a job. Just call us when you take possession of your house. Well, on that, we said, okay, let's do it. We packed up, moved to Dallas. I met the owners of this brand new company called Radio Vision. I had a couple interviews with some other studios. One of them was Stokes Group, was just gorgeous. I walked in, there was marble everywhere. They're doing United Healthcare in one room, American Airlines in another room. And I'm, wow, this is very reminiscent of what I left in LA. Then I went up to the interview at Radio Vision, and there were cables everywhere. They were working on a half-inch reel-to-reel, using semi-pro gear. When I walked in, looked around, I said, you know what? This is a place that I can make a difference.
We briefly mentioned the DVA earlier, the Dallas Voice Acting Meetup Group. How did that all come about, Cliff?
So back in 2005, I started the Dallas Voice Acting Meetup Group. But it's interesting because I started the group specifically to find new local talent for my agency. I was not looking to start any kind of class, any kind of school, so to speak. The first meetup I had, one person showed up, and they brought their baby in the stroller.
Goodness.
The second meetup, I had about 6 or 7 people. The third meetup, I had 20. The fourth meetup, I had over 50. And I don't know how it exploded. So I thought I would give it a shot and just fell in love with it and saw people's eyes light up and light bulbs over their head when they heard themselves reading properly. But what ended up happening was for the first couple months, every night was a newbie's night. I was starting over. So I took a break and I spent about 4 or 5 months and I wrote a whole syllabus. And I said, and I called it the 8 spokes of voiceover. And basically breaking it down into the 8 fundamental skill sets that you must have if you want to even consider voiceover. And then I started bringing in guests, and I brought in some of the just absolute sweethearts of the VO world. I brought in Tom Deere, Dan Friedman, Dave Corvassier, brought in Dan Leonard. Uncle Roy was a favorite. Bring him in over Skype. We would tag team direct, and that took off. I turned down about 80% of those that want to do demos with me, but it's not a bad turn down. It's like, look, I don't want you to spend your money yet. Let's do a little more training, and I will then recommend some coaches that I know personally, and I'm very, very confident, recommending these people. And then I'll talk to the coach in a year, 6 months. How's this person doing? Oh, they're doing great. They need a little bit more here, a little more there. Then we start talking about their home studios, because I insist that all demos that I do, not, you can do whatever you want, have to be recorded from your home studio.
So how can folks get in touch with you, Cliff? Should they have any voiceover questions or audio engineering questions, or maybe they're wanting to produce a demo with you? How can they get in touch with you?
I can be reached by email at kalifu@airmail.net. That's KALIF as in Frank, U as in unicorn, at airmail.net, or my website, a-mazingdemos.com.
Well, Cliff, thank you so much for all your wonderful advice. It has been an absolute honor and pleasure to have you on the show today.
Pleasure to be here, Trenton. Thank you again.
Well, everyone, thanks so much for listening to Who Edited That Voice?
There you go.
With Cliff Zellman and Trenton Larkin. We'll see you next week for another adventure. Well, everyone, that's all the time we have for this episode. Join us this Friday for our next special guest, Blake Powers from 98.7 K-Love in Dallas, Texas. Tune in to hear him share all his stories about radio and voiceover. Hey, are you ready to win some awesome prizes? All you have to do is like our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter for your chance to be instantly and automatically entered for your chance to win.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time for more discoveries on Who Did That Voice.